Great to have you
Pleasure's all
here.
mine.
And to introduce, for those of you who don't know Adi Rajan is a business English ESP trainer and teacher and educator from Mumbai, India. He's interested in ed tech and multilingual approaches. And it's a pleasure to have you here. And I was reading your presentation before, and I'm very much looking forward to what you have to say. So I really appreciate you doing this and being here today. What time is it out there? You're late, right?
It's 8:30. It's not too late.
Yeah. Oh, not too late. Okay, good. Great. Well, I've got your timer here. You got 10 minutes. You have control of the slides, and thanks again. And take
Okay,
it away.
thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me, and hello, everyone. I'm going to talk to you about an app called Feedly, which is a news aggregator, and I'll describe how I use it for specific activities in the Business English and ESP classroom. But before I do that, I'd like to tell you a bit about my context and my learners, because I initially started using Feedly to address a need that they experience. And Shanti says she loves Feedly. Sorry, I'm not supposed to look at the chat. Sorry about that. So I work with professionals in India who are mostly from the knowledge services industry. So they work with consulting and technology and so on, and they collaborate with global stakeholders. They have a fairly high language proficiency, I think similar to what Shanti mentioned. And understandably, my courses tend to focus on discourse, pragmatic, and intercultural competence. And the need that keeps coming up is really from this area, because my learners have a lot of challenges engaging their stakeholders in small talk. And when we say small talk, it's not sort of the EFL perception of small talk, which is generally about the weather or about what you did over the weekend. Because I think mostly in business conversations, and particularly in consulting conversations, small talk is usually about what's happening in your domain or your industry. I've heard a lot of conference calls, I've attended meetings, I've shadowed people as they've, through their workday, and I've noticed that their conversations are generally very, very transactional. And this is unfortunate because there is, of course, an important social function in business for being able to engage your clients or your leadership about what's happening in your industry. And that social function is, of course, you're able to demonstrate your credibility and your expertise. You're able to develop a working relationship with your stakeholders, and perhaps potentially even deepen customer accounts, because in the future you might be able to cross-sell some services. So there are clearly some benefits of this kind of small talk to both the individual and the organization. Now, you might be thinking, if you are perhaps an expert in your area, surely you should be able to speak about your industry with your customers. But I find that's not true with my learners. And I think it's because my learners rarely read. The only time they get input is when they attend a mandatory training program, and that might be quite infrequent, or if they might hear a leader speak and then they get some insights from that, or they hear the managers sharing some information in a meeting. Other than that, some of my learners get subscriptions to these role-based email alerts. So the organization says, okay, here's an email with stuff that might be relevant to you. But for the lack of a better word, it's often just organizational propaganda. So there's just internal thought leadership that they're recycling and sending out to employees. So for example, recently I noticed an email which is full of articles about how the organization is doing really well with automation, but actually that organization is lagging behind in terms of automation. So if you were only to rely on this kind of information as an employee, as a consultant, you don't have much to go on because you have a flawed view of what's happening in the market. So their knowledge of their own industry is actually surprisingly shallow. And there's no concept of CPD as we have in teaching, for example. And so I wanted to choose an app that would help that would kind of help them understand that there is a lot out there and be able to get a quick glimpse and sort of an overview of what's available and quick updates as well. So they really need to be on top of what's happening in their domain and also translate this into business conversations with their clients. And I chose Feedly for that. And some of you probably use Feedly, and Shanti mentioned she likes Feedly. It's a great tool because it gives you feeds from different sites. Now, on Twitter and Facebook, we follow people, but on Feedly, you follow blogs and you follow sites. And the way it works is you pick up a website or a blog, you put it into your Feedly account, and then you follow it. And the great thing is that after you follow it, you can then organize it into thematic feeds. So if you perhaps work for a certain industry like oil and gas or renewable energy, you can organize all that in a way that makes it easy to read it later. There's also a fantastic smartphone app. That's actually the one I use. So that's the one on the right. And it gives you an image, it gives you a preview and the title as well. So it makes it really easy to go through a lot of information and articles. So when I initially introduce my learners to Feedly, I find that's also a very interesting and useful activity. So I get them to download the app, and then I have them populate the app with articles that might be relevant to them. And I don't make this general. I don't just say, go out and find some articles. I say, I give them specific tasks like the ones I have on the slide. Find feeds from 3 parallel industries or domains to follow. And this one I think is very important because a lot of Indian learners or Indian professionals tend to have a very narrow view of their work. So if they, for example, work in oil and gas, they only focus on oil and gas and they don't look at parallel industries. And really in today's world, it's so important to think about other sectors because everything's interconnected, multi-sector and transdisciplinary. Also things like finding feeds from 10 thought leaders from your industry to follow, or following a competitor or a site that's critical of your organization, so you get some contrarian views as well. And they do this outside class, and when they come back for the next lesson, I have them compare their feeds. And generally, I find that they follow the same people and the same sites. And then we have an interesting conversation about groupthink and the value of a diversity of ideas and perspectives. Of course, Feedly lends itself to reading. Obviously, it's about reading, right? So some of the tasks I do are get them to read and preview the preview and predict what it might be about. And that's, I think, a valuable life skill, given that you have no information overload in the digital world. Also, things like reviewing your feed and selecting the top 3 trends or events, explaining why. So there's some critical thinking connected to what I think Brahm was saying earlier. Finding 3 items in your feed which will interest your client, so you make a note of that. Finding new insights, data points, studies, and you write that down as well. And saving articles related to a certain topic to a board. So there are boards within Feedly, so you can save articles there. So I might announce a topic for the day, for example, automation in healthcare, and then they find stuff and they save it to a board. The next step, of course, is to take this into a conversation because that's what you need to do in life as well and in business. So I might get them to plan a conversation starter, make some notes around it about how they might translate these insights into an article. And they practice this with a partner in a group. And then I say, now go off and do it in an internal meeting with a colleague. Try slipping this insight in. And then if it works for you, do it with a client as well. And they come back to the lesson, report back on that. Some of the other activities are drawing parallels between an industry trend, something you've picked up from your reading, and a project event. So again, are you able to weave in insights from reading into business conversations? And finally, this one's more conventional. Take a stand or share an opinion on an article. I think Feedly also lends itself well to writing, really simple but authentic writing tasks. So I might get them to tweet from within the app about the article. It could be the gist, they could agree, they could disagree, they could also highlight a key point. But my learners prefer using LinkedIn. They don't see the value of Twitter. So they might do some similar stuff on LinkedIn. And the last activity, which I like, I'm not sure if my learners like it, get them to write an email. If you notice, there is an email icon also. So they could write an email to a client or a colleague recommending the article. And I think that's a really valuable skill because it kind of helps them practice language. It also helps them think about how they would be making a recommendation and sharing something that they've read. So I try to incorporate 5 minutes of Feedly in most of my courses now. So when they come to the lesson, I don't tell them to put their smartphones away. I tell them to take their smartphones out and look through their feeds and report back on anything they find interesting. And I think this encourages some good behavior, some learner training happening here, which is that they're getting used to looking at Feedly and looking at articles on it, and really getting used to this idea that that you should be looking at insights within your industry and also across industries and feeding this back to your stakeholders. That's all I have for today. Thank you.